All right. Hello and welcome. Good to have everybody back. And of course, Chris Garlock here with Michael Redmond. Michael, always good to see you. How's it going?
Fine.
Good. All right. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Just a reminder, folks, thanks so much for watching. And if you want to support this, Stephen will throw up a link to how you can do that so we can keep all this great content coming your way. Also, I just checked, and the U.S. Go Congress, which is coming up in July, registration opened just a week or two ago, and it's already up by getting close to 100. So I know what's happening because I talked to the organizer. The really all the rooms are great, but there's some rooms in the main lodge, and they are getting snapped up. So if you're thinking about it, go ahead and check it out. usgo.org. Click on U.S. Go Congress. It's going to be in Estes Park, Colorado, up in the mountains, and looking forward to that. I got to check, Michael, and see if they've got tennis courts. You know, it's in between working on the broadcast and all the stuff that the eJournal team gets up to. I like to go hit a few balls in the afternoon, so to check that out. All right, I am thrilled. I love our AlphaGo commentaries. But I really, really love, as do our viewers. I've checked the comments. People love your games, Michael. I think it's because we fool ourselves that we can actually understand what's going on. And they're really, really exciting. So today, this is a game, another one of your tournament games, right? Tell us about the tournament and then tell us about the player.
This is the Judon tournament. And I started actually in the C section. So that's the lowest elimination tournament in this. And, I'm starting in different stages of each tournament. So, Sometimes I'll be in the final stages, and it's separate for each tournament.
Okay.
So in this tournament, I'm starting in the C section. And I had some pretty famous players to start with. So this is my game against Kudo Norio, who is, he's been a 9-dan for a long time. He's, I think he's in his 70s, late 70s now. So he's a pretty old person. He's been constantly having good records throughout his career. And last century it is now. I think in the 70s to the 90s about, he was involved in some of the titles. So he took a couple of titles, the Oza. He took the Oza from Cho Chikun. Mm-hmm. And let's see, he took the Tengen from Rin Kaiho. So he did take 2 titles, and he challenged some more. He spent some time in the round-robin leagues. So he's a fairly well-known player, but he's maybe not as famous as the people who do a lot of teaching or are more conspicuous on the net, you might say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how would you describe his playing style?
He's a very steady player. When he was a young player, he was an attacking player. He liked to create strong positions and attack. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't bother so much about territory, and he's still a very you might call him a thick player. He likes to build strong positions. He doesn't like to be under attack. Mm-hmm. And so he avoids that. And he has a very well-balanced game with a solid opening. And for a person of his age, he's integrating a lot of AI stuff too. So he's keeping up with that.
Really cool. And that was going to be one of my questions was, so ahead of a time, who you're going to be playing. Do you... Mm-hmm. What kind of preparation do you do?
Well, usually what I do all the time is that I'm looking at other professional games, looking at my own games, and using Leela to analyze them. But it's very important to me that I do it myself first. I try to do it myself first, get some of my own ideas, and then I'll have my own original ideas that I can work out with Leela, because otherwise, it's very easy when the computer is so strong, obviously stronger than the top human players. It's very easy to be just on the receiving end, and I want to have my own opinions before I start working with Leela.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Last thing before we get started, just a reminder to folks who are watching that. Unlike in our videos on YouTube, we're live and you're live, and so feel free to ask us questions as we go along, and we will attempt to answer them. as we get into the flow of the game. All right, let's get going.
Okay. Well, this game, just to tell you from the start, it's
Yeah.
not a very well played game on my part. So you can probably learn more from what White is doing, but it is going to be interesting in the opening because we're doing something that's pretty modern here. When Black plays the approach, but I sort of hang in and manage to turn it over late in the game, so it's a lot of suspense there, you might say.
Oh, excellent.
So in this position, it's become customary for White to play away when Black plays the approach move here. There's no problem with White answering. Like White has a number of moves. Let's just mark the board up a little bit. White could answer here. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not going to give White a bad position necessarily, but it's more common for White to play some kind of an approach move on the left side. And as far as I know, I think the AIs give these 4 moves on the right side good percentages. And actually, in this position, I think the 3 points are just a little bit lower in winning percentage for White. Of course, with Leela at this point, since Leela is working with 7.5 points, Leela likes White a bit more than Black. So White has something like 57%, and Black has something like 43%. So when working with Leela, I have to sort of understand that thing also, the fact that Leela doesn't give good winning percentages to Black.
So let me ask you this, and we've mentioned it from time to time, and you're using AI, using Leela, when it agrees with you or disagrees with you, how do you use that in your analysis? So say the Leela comes up with something very different from what you had in mind, or the percentages are different than what you have in mind. How do you handle that?
Well, firstly, there's so much huge amount of information there that I sort of restrict it to openings that I think I would actually be playing,
Okay.
obviously. But then when Leela comes up with something that is different from what I would do, I just the good thing about having the computer on the program on your own computer is that you can make variations for it. So I just make variations, try to refute the move, try new things with the move, try going through the variations that Leela suggests. I just make a lot of variations in an attempt to understand exactly what is going on and whether I actually want to go into that. Because there's some cases even now when Leela will give a good percentage to a certain move, but after a bit, it's going to go down. Actually, yeah, that does happen.
Right.
There might be some, and so it's very strange that it's missing a move. It's not within the expanse of its understanding at some certain point, but you just move one move forwards, and then suddenly it realizes that one side is doing better than it thought before. So the percentages can change. So there's moves that will give you a good percentage and then continue to get better and better as the game progresses. And then there's moves that sort of flip around and they're not as good as they seem to be at first. So I have to go into the variations to understand what's going on.
Right. And I think that makes sense. I think that there's it's a little bit of a trap if we wind up relying, and it's true for any technology, right? If we rely on it too much without question, we can get in trouble, right?
Well, you have to question it because sometimes it's not 100% correct.
Right.
But even more important is that you have to understand it because your opponent's not going to be playing the moves that Leela shows you. So you have to understand it fully. Like you have to try out the moves that you would play or you think your opponent might try playing against a human move. The human move is not the move that Leela shows every time. So White plays here. This choice of an approach towards the upper right is actually, it has to do with a ladder that's going to happen in the lower left corner. And so it's a very popular move. It was played against me by Cho Chikun last year when he was maging. He was still maging. Well, actually, I think he just took the tournament before he played me. So he was the maging title holder when he played me. It was a very similar position, only the lower right corner was not a start point. I had played on the 3-4 point. Or the R4 point, you might say. So I play a double Kakari. Now, this is a move where actually Leela is suggesting I should play a Kakari against the upper left corner. And I knew that, but I had something I wanted to try. And like at this point, the difference between various moves, especially for this white move here, the difference between this move and other approach moves, it's very small. Like it's maybe half a percentage point if you leave Leela to think about it for a while. So it's not really anything that a human would notice, or even it doesn't bother me if a certain move is 1% or a few percent lower. Like 5% would be, maybe I should be thinking about that, but anything less than that is probably a small difference. And like it takes about 10% difference, like 40% and 60% before a human pro is actually feeling the difference, feeling that he's ahead or behind at that point. And it's still a very slight difference for a human player. So at this point is where usually the ladder has to that comes into play. So like if black plays here, which is a very popular move now, white can play the cut here. Black connects and white takes in a ladder. So this ladder would not work without this white stone here. It would hit the black star point. So the star point would have been a ladder breaking move, but with that white approach move, the ladder works for white. So we get into this trade. And this is actually the way the game that I played against Cho with, and I pointed out here in the SDF file, you can see that the mark B is marking where the black stone in the lower right corner was. So that was not a star point, it was at B. And this is the game where Cho told me. I talked about it in the Congress, actually. So it's probably in the AGA's YouTube channel somewhere. Cho told me after the game that white had a good percentage, but he would not tell me the exact number. So he was being just a little bit, I think it's just he was being playful. Right. But it was as if it was sort of secret information that he couldn't divulge. And of course, there is the fact that all we have to do is put that position into a computer and we can get the same result.
Right. It's not so secret.
Yeah, although I do think Cho probably uses a number of programs. He's not limited to Leela. So instead of playing the common move here, I wanted to try this. Now, this was, actually, it was the second time I had played this move in the same board position. So it was the second time I tried it out, and I wanted to experiment with this move. So that's why going back just a few moves, that's why I actually played this approach move when I knew that the suggested move was actually this, a very slight difference anyway. So I played this move, and white attaches here. So in this case, I think this is actually an improvement on, for instance, this variation where black, this is another variation that could have happened. I think that the game position is actually even a little better for black with this exchange here, because it gives extra eye space to the black group on the left. Potential eye space, if black just takes that stone at some point.
Right.
So white plays, so it makes sense that white is not playing the connection on the third line here, because then this exchange would just be bad for white. So at least that's how I see it. So white plays here. This could have been an attachment on top of the black stone. But this is a move that I think he had prepared for the game. And this is where I got a bit confused. My original plan was to play an extension on the lower side. So I'll say it's here. I was thinking of the fourth line, actually, or this.
Sure,
I had trouble deciding. And white can pincer, and I couldn't find a good move for black to play. And so that's why I sort of gave up on this variation. But then, of course, I asked Leela, and Leela had no problem playing the 3-3 point. And, you know, this makes sense. When I look at this, it makes sense because black does have that cut at C in the corner, and will have no problem making a life. Like, it's very difficult for white to take away black's eyes here. Even if white were to continue with something like this, this black group would be potentially alive if black just played here. Like, if we have, there's this life here that black is not going to play in the near future, but there is this way that black could make a living shape. So it's a fairly resilient group, and so I would have been okay just leaving it. I think this is the valid. White would probably play away, maybe in the upper right corner or something, and would not attacking this black group immediately is probably not the best idea. White would probably switch to the right side of the board, and so I was okay with this. But the fact is that when I thought of white pincering somewhere around here, either here or it could be a low pincer, maybe a low pincer somewhere around here, I didn't really know what I was going to do with that, so I gave up on that variation, and I extended on this side. And from my viewpoint, this made me feel safe about any moyo that white might be trying to build on the upper side. But that was not the way Leo saw it. And so this is already supposedly good for white. And now white plays a double kakari. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because we're going to start with this is actually a kind of a pet variation for Kudo, and I knew that. Nonetheless, I messed up because I hadn't prepared for it. Now this is where white plays this move, which according to the computer analysis that I did later is not really a very good move. But this is a move that Kudo really liked to play. He analyzed it and started playing it in professional games probably about 30 years ago, or maybe even before that. So he's a relatively young player. And black will usually extend down here, after which white cuts here. And there's all sorts of variations here. In this SDF, I'm just showing you the variation that Leela showed me. Usually you have, in the games that have been played up till now, you see black playing here, almost always. After that, white's going to play Hane here. And it's a bit painful for black, because if black covers here, that's just bad. White gets to cut off the center stones. Oh, sorry. I jumped into a different variation. So when white plays the Hane, if black connects here, white gets to extend here with Sente. And again, this is satisfying for white. Black will eventually need to play on the 2-2 point, this 18 point.
Oof.
So that's not so good.
No.
And so black is running out of, like, this would be painful too. So
this looks like a lot of ways.
This is the idea behind. Yeah, this is the idea behind white's move, because of course, if black avoids that by playing on this side, white gets a free forcing move here. So that's good for white too. So this is a relatively rare move to start with, and so I had not really researched it very well. And it turns out that black is playing here, which we thought was a bad variation. The general consensus was this was bad for black. And what's going to happen here is white curls here, and black has no way to capture these two stones, because black has this in there. Black has to go straight down. So black goes down to the second line, and white can cover with Sente. Black can get rid of, black has to deal with the cut on the fourth line. So black's going to play here to get rid of the cut there. And white can capture 3 stones. And this was always thought to be good for white, because white has captured those 3 stones on the upper side, taken away black's corner. But it's actually, in this board position, it's giving black a good winning percentage. And part of that is because black, my take on that is that black has all this aji with this attachment here. Black can play some forcing moves from the left side there, the upper side of the board. And it's going to be relatively easy for black to invade that white territory. And also the width, the space that black has on the right side is really good. So like if white plays something like this and black plays something like this, you can see black has a nice moyo centered on the right side of the board.
Yeah.
And of course, this move that white's playing on the left here is a pretty important move. Otherwise, like at some point, black can play here. And this is a completely different fight, which is also playable for black. So that is also an important point. So it's not like I was making things easy for black when I played that white move. It's going to be playable for black in either case. And so so I didn't judge that the same, and I didn't get into that variation. And when we're assuming that black is going to be going into one of these variations, or maybe avoiding that. I'll show you how black avoids it in the game. This is actually the same position with the moves reversed. So like if black starts here and white cuts here, and then black connects here, we're going to get into the same variation. So in the game move was this one, and it was just a different order of moves. So when black is going to go into this variation, it doesn't matter whether black starts with this move or starts with this move, probably. It's a very minor, a small difference. Now I would say that I should have played here and gone into leadless variation, but at the time I was thinking it was the same. And so black sacrifices 2 stones and gets to cut here. And white should just actually, we both messed up here. White should just play here, and this kind of fight will ensue. It's a good position for white. For instance, white has the threat after playing white has the threat basically to take away black's eye space by jumping here. Black can get rid of that by playing an attachment here, but squeezing those 2 stones at this point will just give white a very solid position on the upper side. So white's going to be happy about that. White's going to welcome that variation. So it's a bit annoying for black to have to be playing this kind of move to settle the cornerstones. For the time being, black might be fighting on the right side for a bit, like black could continue with this kind of move, for instance. It's no problem for white. And of course, yeah.
No, I just wanted to go back to a comment you made at the beginning of this, which is that you knew that this is a favorite of his, but you had not prepared for it.
I had not prepared for it. Well, you know, part of it was that I was having a game every week, and I think that week I had a lot of stuff. My recollection, it was back in October last year, I think, maybe a bit earlier. My recollection was that I had not had time to prepare for this particular game with Kudo, thinking of Kudo as my opponent that previous week. So like if I'm not so busy, then I would be doing it maybe a couple of weeks in advance. But in this case, it was about the time when I was playing those famous players like Takao, Kobayashi Satoru. Let's see, there was another famous Otake, Ishida. There was a period where I had a number of games against these famous players all in a row, and I was just taking it one game at a time.
Yeah.
And I think with this game, I wasn't. If I had thought particularly of Kudo as my opponent, I think this is one of the josekis. He has a lot of pet josekis. He likes to study joseki in openings. So you can get into trouble with Kudo because he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. But I don't think I was prepared properly in this game. So to go back to the main variation, what he did was he jumped here. And this is a greedy move. And it crossed my mind, but I rejected this move, which is what I should have done. This actually, it makes sense now. There's no way for white to save the 2 stones. Something like this will happen again. And the point is that if white crawls here, that's going to put white into trouble here because white has that cut in the corner. If white plays away then black can cut here and capture 2 stones. It's a position where white has no way to push. And so this would be really bad for white. The point is that white cannot play the crawl at 4. So white would just leave that. Eventually black is going to, eventually black is going to have the right to play this at some point in the game. It's going to be black's endgame move there. So there's no point in my playing it immediately, which is what I did. So in the game, I played this move, which made this exchange maybe a kikashi for white. Actually, it's not clear whether that's really that big, but there is a bit of difference in the corner territory when we compare it to this position where at some point black is going to play the squeeze here. There is a slight difference in the corner territory. So white has gained a little bit. So that was bad. And to get back to the game, now white plays the squeeze here. So I'm making a lot of, they're not really big mistakes, but I'm playing some slack moves here. And it's looking bad for me in the hole. Again, here I should have cut. So it's a pretty painful game for me to be going through actually, because there's all these mistakes.
I have to say, I was just feeling it. I was like, I haven't talked about tennis in a while, but I've been having a bunch of big matches lately, and what I've been noticing, and this is what I wanted to ask you, is that I guess I'm getting good enough at tennis to where I am aware of my mistakes as I'm making them, which
Yeah.
is it's an improvement, but it is so painful. Like it's one thing if you look back later and you're like, oh, I should have done this, but so I was going to ask you, so were you feeling this at the time you
Well,
weren't feeling
obviously, I did
comfortable?
realize that I'd messed up at this point. And so I should have played the cut here to sort of mix things up on the right. This is
hmm
an area where I do have potential to be on the attacking side.
hmm
In this case, actually, the black group in the upper right corner is alive as it stands. It
Right.
has 2 eyes already.
Right.
So I can leave that. And I do have potential to attack on the right side. White does have, overall, white has an advantage in this position.
hmm
But there's no helping that. It's already bad for me.
Right.
But I should have played this way. I'm trying something unusual. I was trying to attack the white on a larger scale, but it wasn't really working out. Like
Okay.
I'm trying to put pressure on that white group. And white just plays this. Now jumping down on the second line is going to be big.
Just
So
for
he's taking up key
we
points.
have a question from our viewers. They want to know how it's alive. Just show them how it's
Okay,
alive.
yeah, good. So if white plays here, white needs to save this 1 stone in the corner. So if white plays here, for instance, locally black can just play here. And this is a live shape because if white jumps in, it's a bent 4th position. So
Nice.
it's just alive. So otherwise, if white plays, if white plays here, of course, then black just pushes through and cuts. So that's no problem. So it's alive. And the truth is that when white does play a move like this, then it will be an opportunity for black to do something in the center of the board. So black's not necessarily going to answer immediately. So there's a lot of, so if we go into that fight here, there's a lot of extra, like in this case, if white had played, let's see, this variation. If white had played this move in this position, then I would start doing stuff in the center of the board like this.
Right.
It's not as if I would immediately.
Yeah, but looking at that move, it works, doesn't it?
Locally, it works. And it works better when white has used this stone at 8 to protect the corner, because eventually I'm going to be forcing white to play here also.
Right.
So they would be overlapping sort of. They would be over concentrated.
Okay.
So get back to the game.
Good question, folks. Thank you.
Yeah. So here, this is a vital point, controlling the whole board. White's lower left corner was sort of alive, but like there was some potential for black to squeeze that group a bit. So it's stretching the lower left corner and putting pressure on my side. I can't really afford to let white jump on the second line at this point. That would be just a territory for white. So I slide here. I slide here, and white plays away. So I would say that white's play in this opening, apart from the fact that objectively this move here that he played, according to Lito, that's not a sound move. But it worked really well in the game. Apart from that, he's playing almost perfectly.
But that goes to your point that even though Leela doesn't like it, it
works against the human player.
It's 2 human players, and you can't discount that. You try to display all computer moves, you're going to get in trouble.
And we were working with the same human conclusions about that particular variation, which were maybe not correct, outdated, you might say. So this move is actually a move that showed up in the computer analysis, but the way I finished it didn't agree. At this point, I'm already figuring that the game objectively looks pretty bad for me. So I'm going to try something. I'm trying to set up an attack, and at this point, I decide to
just explain to folks why, because I think I'm not sure people would understand why.
Well, at this point, it's still difficult to count the territory, but there's the fact that this position I have in the lower right, it really needs 1 more stone to become a territory. Like at this point, we're not sure whose territory it is. So black's territory for the time being is just about 10 points on the left side, and less than, well, I guess the upper right could be called 10 points too.
Right. Just show folks the holes in black's lower right position. I think a lot of folks might think that looks pretty solid. I can see.
Well, for instance, the easiest move for white to do would be this one. And now if black protects the corner, then you can see that white is going to be the side. Well, white could play here. I'm not sure whether it would be better to play there just to jump.
Sure.
White has a forcing move against the corner here. If white gets to play this Kosumi here, black will have to answer in the corner. Otherwise, the whole corner gets in trouble. That means that these stones that black has on the lower side, they're under pressure. Black needs to play something like this. Maybe let's play the move just. So black needs to play something like this, maybe. And you can see white. It's actually in this case. Oh, sorry, that's a terrible move. That was a misclick. And black plays here maybe, and something like this. Black's territory is down to something like 15 points, and white is getting something in the center of the board. So this is the general idea here. Otherwise, black could answer that. Black could answer that on the top. And this is going to happen later in the game, but I should show you that while the game move, white wedged between black 2 and the star point, the simplest way to handle this is to extend here. And if black covers on the corner side, white can get out here. Again, the black stones on the left are in trouble a little bit. Otherwise, if black connects, then white can jump into the corner. And in this case, whichever side black cuts, white's going to capture the stone. Or if black just plays something like this to connect up, then white can live in the corner. So this is an easy fight for white.
Right.
Like this is white's territory. White has more territory now. So that's a kind of the normal way for white to attack. But even if black plays first here, so this is an example of black playing first. Still, white has forcing moves like this. In a handicap game, white can often play here, and it's really difficult to deal with this sometimes. I don't think this would happen in this particular position, but even when you play the diagonal move there at 1, you do have to worry about the 3-3 point sometimes. In this case, white would probably just be playing forcing moves from outside. And this would be more than 20 points. But like then white would be getting a big move, for instance, on the left side. And so white just has this positional advantage with a lot of potential in the upper left part of the board. And as I was saying, this would take black up to, I said black had about 20 points. This would take black over to about 40 points. White has a few points in the lower left corner, a few points on the right side, and a few points plus a lot of thickness in the upper right. That takes white up to about 20 points. And then we have this whole structure that white has in the upper left. White only needs to get, let's do it with a pencil. White only needs to get something like 15 points from this whole area to have a close game. So obviously, white's going to get more than 20 points. It's probably good for white even before Komi. So that would be my analysis of the position.
Wow, I love the pencil. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's fun to use.
Yeah. I feel like we're doing sports casting now. Okay, then the fullback goes this way. The safety comes in. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Right. So I'm trying an attack here. And the idea is that if it works really well, maybe it's going to do something good for the lower right area. Like that, I'm sort of hoping that, although I have a lot of weaknesses in this position, if I can get a big attack going against white on the right side, sorry, then maybe it's going to help me surround that territory. But white takes it very calmly, and white plays here and here. Now this is a good move because extending here would not be as good. Let's have white extend on the second line. This would actually not be so good. I'd probably continue here. And as it stands, white has only one eye. So white would have to struggle a bit. And this is an example of where I would be getting a good position in the lower right area. And it would be getting closer and closer to being a territory. So this would be a good scenario for black. I think that it would be an even game already. So white plays here. Now when black does something like that, like if black did something like this, now white's pretty much alive. And also is putting a lot more pressure on the two stones here. So it's a lot easier for white to pick up those two stones. So this is not as good for black. And so I cut here, and white connects. There's pros of cons. At the time, I thought white should have played a hanging connection here. When I went into the analysis, it was hard to say. There's pros and cons to that move.
Mm.
So it's okay. This is okay for white. And I grabbed some territory. Now, I'm pretty, at the time, I knew that this was not really objectively the best way to play, but I'm taking territory and trying to put some pressure on white by doing so. So actually, throughout the rest of the game, my basic plan is going to be to grab territory and see what happens in the relatively open areas. Mm. And so I don't feel that I have enough time to, for instance, to play a stone like this. I didn't feel that, like this would take me close to 50 points. But white also has, again, white has, with a nice territory on the right now, taking those two black stones, I'd say white has more than 20 points in solid territory, and then this framework in the upper left. It gives white a slight advantage. Mm. And you have to notice that white has, with this forcing move here, white does have some extra potential in this general area. So there's some sort of invisible territory there, which is going to show up later in the game.
Okay.
And so I decided not to, objectively, this would be the closest game, I think. But I decided to play first in the upper left area. So I play this sequence, taking some
nice move. Yeah.
So that takes me up to about 20 points on the left side. I have about 20 points on the right side, plus this area in the lower right. So if white, like we're talking about a professional 9-dan, so it's not a real possibility, but if he got scared and he didn't invade that lower right area, I would have potential to be going up to something like 60 points. And then I would have enough territory. But of course, white takes this time to invade the lower right. First, he played some forcing moves on the left. And he's in very good form in this game up to this point. So he plays this attachment and plays some forcing moves here, just giving white a bit more potential in the center. And with this kind of a position, white does have potential to actually be more greedy. For instance, like could play stuff like this, and maybe get something out of it. But there's some danger to this kind of tactic. So it's white's just reducing and getting something back in the center. It's usually it's a better choice. And then white finally invades here.
A quick question. They're wondering about, and actually because this move comes up now, I'm talking about that lower right. People are wondering about something like M5, the jump out, to try and deal with that on the right. Yeah.
M5 would
that
be
seems like it might be a little loose, right?
Well, there is a question of how white's going to deal with the corner. Like white could even jump into the 3-3 point, but I would tend to want to play the double hane here.
I think before the invasion.
Before the invasion. Oh yeah. So we could go back to this point maybe. No, further. Once I get started there in the upper left, I have to continue.
You have to finish, right? Yeah.
So at this point, jumping here. White could still jump into the 3-3 point, for instance. White's not going to do it immediately, but white could play here. In this case, white could just crawl and play the hanging connection. That's going to be a ko. And the problem with this ko is that when black loses it, let's just do some random variation here. When black loses the ko, everything, all of black's stones here are going to be in danger. The whole group here has no eyes.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And it's not really connected up either. So this white might answer that ko threat black just played. But if we assume that at some point white wins the ko, it's very dangerous for black. So in this ko, and it's generally true of this ko that happens with the 3-3 invasion, it's a very heavy, dangerous ko for black also. It's not only that white is going to lose the corner, black also has a lot to lose in this ko. And so it's in many cases, black's just going to allow this group to live. Black might just leave it at this point. Or actually, it would probably be the safe way for black to play would be allowing white to connect up on the side here. This is probably the best way for black to play. but it simplifies the game. So now black has close to 20 points, maybe more like 15 points there, but white also has close to 10 points on the side. So if we count the 2 stones that white has captured here, these 2 stones, if we count this territory, the territory is pretty close to equal in this area of the board. So it all disappears. So white still has a lot of potential there. Going back to white's original move, when white plays that 3 invasion, black really needs a stronger position to be able to be playing moves like this or moves like this, which sometimes can kill the cornerstone. Like this would be a move that black might try to use to kill the white cornerstone. Black doesn't really have. Now, if I got into this, it would be very confusing, difficult for me also to give the correct variation. But it's going to be difficult for, even if white just simply plays here, black would have to be playing something like this. And it's going to be a very dangerous variation for black. And white will have opportunities to get something out of it, even if white ends up sacrificing the cornerstones.
So, I mean, I think we're saying the problem with the jump at 1 is it really doesn't solve the corner problem. It doesn't really do anything useful on the outside either, right? So,
actually, in this case, the group that I would be focusing on would be the white group on the right side. So if I'm going to play here, actually, I would not want to play this move because it's too submissive. But I would think of playing this move.
I was wondering about that. That seems slow, but it kind of just solves everything, right?
Well, at this point, it's not killing the white group because white still has an eye here. But if white invades the corner, that's going to invade with it. The invasion in the 3-3 point is going to interfere with white's eye here if I handle it properly.
Right.
So that means that after that, I would have a potential attack against white on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was going to play anything, since the left side, if we look at the left side, white stones, even if black jumps here, black doesn't really have a big attack against white on the left side. So it's more potential for me if I play this way. And sort of, although looks like a strong white group, it does sort of depend on this eye here. So I would have an outside chance of getting an attack on that white group.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I would still have a small potential of pushing through and cutting here also.
Okay.
It would require a lot of preparation, but you have to have your hopes. You have to have a kind of a game. So that would be a move that I would have been a playable move. It would have been maybe objectively better than the actual game. But I had an idea here that I would take territory and sort of put the question to white, what white's going to do in the lower right.
Right.
But
what was it playing at the time controls for this game?
3 hours.
Wow.
Actually, when I realized the game was going bad, in this game, I decided to play fairly quickly. And save some time for the end game, and also hoping to put my opponent under time pressure because I think if we disregard the time controls at this point, it's a pretty hopeless game for black. So I have to have some extra factor here to stay in the game.
Right.
So I was playing fairly quickly, trying to put some pressure on my opponent, and trying to sort of pose questions, you might say. So this was one of them. It didn't really work out because he had no problem invading the lower right. And I attached white. Actually, white wedged. Now this is where he starts to sort of make slight concessions, and it's no problem for white because white's winning anyway. But like extending it in that variation I was showing you before,
right?
It would be the stronger move. We could go into it again. Extending it if white gets to jump into the corner, it's just the territorial gain that white gets from this, like this to go into, which side will we have black cut? Maybe the right side.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. That was completely meaningless. White. So now black has slightly more than 10 points. White has about 5 points in the corner. Black's territory is a minimum of 5 points. So that's really a big decrease in black's territory. There's also the fact that this has not interfered with white's potential eye here on the right side. So I have no potential attack going. Otherwise, I could cut on the left side, in which case white's going to take it. And let's see, maybe white will just, I have question in my mind, should white bump against black on the third line or play as an attachment on the second line? Either one works. So like maybe something like this could happen. Again, white has 4 points of territory. Black has maybe close to 10 points. So again, most of black's territory is gone here.
Scooped. He's been scooped.
Scooped, yes. So this is very easy for white to make a life in the corner. In the game, he wedged. And as far as territory is concerned, this is not going to be so effective. But since white is ahead anyway, even in this variation, it probably doesn't matter very much. So this way, black gets something like 20 points on the side. White has some center territory, but of course, this area in the center, I'm talking about this area, potential white territory. If I can invade that successfully, the game is going to get closer. So white takes some territory back.
Yeah, this seems like it's good for black, right?
Well, to look at the game at this point, white has about 20 points in the lower left corner now. White has grabbed some territory back. Black has about 20 points on the left side, so that's about equal. Black has some potential to get a little bit more than white, but it's about equal. Black has about 20 points in the corner and about 20 points on the right side, so that's 40 more points. White has 5 points on the right here. Maybe I could write it down. 5 points here.
Oh,
20
cool.
points.
Yeah.
15 points here.
Mm-hmm.
Just an approximation.
Yeah.
And a minimum of about 5 points here.
Yeah.
So that's 10, 30, 45. Black has about 20 points here.
We do have to tell people they should not try this in actual games, though, right? This is
Ruin the go board. So black has about 60. And black is not going to increase anymore in this game. So this is sort of like the limit for black. White has 20, 25, 45, 40, 55. Oh, sorry. Let's count again. 20, 45, 45. White has 45, black has 60. White has to catch up 15 points. But we haven't counted this area, which still has a bit of potential. We haven't counted this area. And we haven't counted the komi. So white basically only needs about 10 more points and has all of these areas that are sort of controlled by white more than black. And pulling this area here in the upper right, just let's erase everything. Talking about this area in the upper right, I was counting it as if black has played this exchange. And then it's a minimum of 5 points for white. And that was how I was counting the right area for the right side for black also.
Okay.
The fact that black has to play this, it's going to increase white's potential on the upper side. Or if black uses the forcing move, for instance, if black uses a forcing move here, this is a forcing move that black could have used against the white stones. So going back here, let's go back to the position here. Like black could sometimes use a forcing move here. That's going to take away black's forcing moves in the corner. So that's going to change the equation here. Like this would take white closer to 10 points in the upper right and black closer to 15 points on the right side. So it would make a big difference in territory. So there's a kind of a dilemma there for black, that black wants to use both sides. And so for a while, you're going to see that I leave the decision to very late in the game because I want to have both options. But the calculation where I had black 15 points ahead in solid territory was counting on the fact that I was going to eventually use this. Mm-hmm. So it's a negative. It has to be calculated into the fact that white's going to have pretty good prospects on the upper side too. Mm-hmm. And like when black goes into the upper side, I'm very doubtful that black would get any territory out of it.
Right.
And so white has a lot of potential here. Black has something like 15 points lead in territory before komi. And so again, I'm trying to put some pressure on that white group on the right side with this move. The normal move for black would have been to extend here. And white's going to answer on the right. I was thinking that white's going to answer on the right side. And then white has the follow-up move here, which is going to scoop out some more of black's territory in the corner. And so this would just take the territory already to being very close. And so I didn't think it had very good prospects for me. So I tried this one. So I'm taking away white's eye space. And the point is I do have the option to move out into the center here. For instance, if white tries to cut me off, this is going to be a disaster for white. This would be just a black win. So even though white gets this covering on the fifth line here is a kind of a vital point here, but I still do have potential to move out into the center. And in doing so, I will have some potential to attack, or at least threaten to attack white on the right side. So this was all according to plan. I do think objectively at this point, the game is getting a bit more complicated and maybe a bit closer. But white handled it fairly well here. White's alive with this sequence here. This move in particular is a move that is sort of, you would expect white to extend, but this would not be as good because black would still have this move to take away white's eye space. And so this would actually give black a continued attack against the white group. So this move here that white played is actually a very good move that secures a complete living shape. This is just two eyes as it stands in this area. So it's a perfect life. A very good move. It was sort of a strange shape, you might say. You would expect white to be extending, but this is much more practical. And again, the normal move would be to extend, for me to extend in the center. Let's see, this way. But I'm just trying to keep things, keep the pressure on white by taking territory. Now I have something like almost 25 points in the lower right area. So I have gotten a little bit of extra territory, and I'm closer to 65 now. And again, white has something like 45, a bit more now, but close to 45. Objectively, it's an easy win for white. It's going to be difficult for me to invade the upper side now.
Right.
So white finishes the upper side. And that upper side in itself is going to be more than 40 points.
Wow, it's so big.
So black has 65, white has 40 points there. 7 points on the right side, almost 20 points, about 20 points in the lower left. So that's 40, 60, 60. It looks like white's ahead before Komi.
Right. So what's your plan at this point? I mean, you haven't really changed the story.
I haven't really made much improvement at this point.
Yeah.
So I just have to continue the end game. For the time being, my object is going to be to reduce the upper side as much as possible. And hopefully if white surrounds the upper side, I'm probably going to get some black stones towards the center of the board. I don't have that much room there, but I'm hoping to make something in the center. That's the only way I can get close to it.
You're going to try and make territory in the center of this board.
Right, yeah.
Is your plan to get
him
to doubtful. Well, I'm thinking, is it going to be, oh, look, there's a bird?
Well, so I start with this attachment.
Okay.
And at this point, the game is it's a one game for white.
Yeah.
But when white plays here, it's already getting closer. White sort of just answered it.
Whoa. That looks like a misclick.
It's a strong move. Well, the point is that when white plays here, white can pull this stone out with Sente. So white's looking at a counterattack. Like if white pulls out the one stone at the mark point, black's going to have to connect on the right there. This gives white potential to attack in the center of the board. So yeah, it's a move that one would think of.
Okay.
But since white is way ahead, white should have just played here.
That's right.
Played very simply. Like
a rich man
that might be too much.
Is this the rich man should not pick fights proverb?
Right, exactly. But white pushed out here. So I think my quick playing at this point it had an effect.
Yeah.
Like I played the attachment very quickly because that's just about the only move. This move is the only move black has towards the upper side. So it was an easy choice for me. And now I play the double attachment. And this is already creating some problems for white because if white answers normally, then we get into this variation, which is a kind of a headache for white. Black has A or B. Black's already gained a few points here.
Oh man, that is cool. Wow.
If white in the SDF file, I'm going to leave it there. But like if white plays here and then plays here, you can see that black's going to. Actually, I shouldn't have played that exchange. Black's going to win capture the corner. Yeah. Well, for instance, like this. Yeah. Actually, black might actually go into that variation and do this. I think this works. Yeah, I think this works too. So black can capture. That would be good for black, obviously. So if white plays on the other side, now black connects up to the center, and well, that's a lot better than the game. I mean, a lot better than it was before. So I should be happy with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, playing something like this and allowing black to capture one stone, that's not a happy result for white either. It's white's losing a bit. So white pulled back. So white pulled back at this point. There's still some problems associated with this move. So just going back a couple of moves again, white should have answered at A. White should have answered here, and it would have kept things a lot simpler.
Mm.
So already I'm posing some problems here.
Yeah.
And again, the moves that black has to play to keep putting pressure on white, they're all pretty easy choices because I have nothing to lose. So I'm going to push through and cut here. And again, this is posing a lot of problems for white with this forcing move that sometimes works here. So like, for instance, how shall we have white play? Like if we have white do something like, for instance, this would actually be a potential move. But black looks like black can get something here on this side. This actually might not be good enough. This is probably playable for white. But for instance, this kind of stuff can happen. You can see that there's going to be some kind of problem related to white's upper side territory. Black's going to have some options to reduce it. This variation is probably okay for white, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot more complicated than white wants things to be. So white just connected here. This is probably objectively a slightly slack move. Black is gaining a little bit here. And also this move, white is playing very simply. But actually, this was an opportunity for white to pull out the one stone here. And black is going to answer here. And then white just leaves it. Just that exchange alone, it gives white some more potential there. And also on the upper side, it's better for white to play here, which looks like a kludgy move, but there's no way black's going to be playing underneath. Like this is the variation that I'm going to show at first. Mm-hmm. This is actually a 4-point gain for white when compared to the game. Just capturing that black stone here, capturing this black stone and getting this stone too, white has some extra territory there. It's a 4-point difference. And the center position hasn't changed so much. It's mm-hmm. not so much a difference black gains. And in the actual game, white played underneath, and black got to capture the one stone. So as I was saying, compared to the variation, that's a 4-point gain for black. And the center position has not changed that much. So I get this in, and now I finally take the corner territory. And you can see I'm leaving the option for a ko here in the corner towards the end of the endgame. Looking at the overall position, I don't really have very many ko threats. So it's unlikely, but I do want to leave that potential because I'm still a few points behind. And with this move here, I have captured that white stone. So I'll make a variation here to show you what I'm talking about. Now I can capture this stone by playing this way. There's no way for white to escape.
All right.
So by playing this move, I've accomplished capturing this stone. And you can see that if white had earlier played this exchange, it would just give that much more potential to white. Even though white does not immediately save those stones, it would give white the potential to save the two stones and put some pressure on black in the center of the board. So that was an exchange that white forgot to play. And you can see with this move here, I am continuing to have a position where I have captured that white stone. So cutting there was an important move. Now white cuts here. And I'm feeling the game, at least I'm probably winning on the board. It's getting pretty close.
I was going to say
relative.
it feels like black has a chance now.
Mm. And I had a choice of capturing the stone, which would give white more potential in center, or pulling back. So I felt that the game was getting close enough that I could play the relatively, what I thought was the correct move, the safe move. And white starts here. Again, this was a point where white still knows that he's still ahead, and he's playing the simpler move where it would have been better to play an attachment at A, just to show you that on the board. Attaching here, white has the group in the lower left is a group that would be relatively easy to connect up to. White has these stones in the center, which are showing up as a group that white can connect up to. Black's not so strong in the upper left either. So white would be able to do this and reduce black's territory. Or if black just answers underneath, obviously this is going to be better than allowing black to have those 2 points of territory. So that's what happened in the game. White played a hane. I'm gaining a point or so here, I think, in this variation, where I get to this move perfectly. White's still ahead. Like in this move, if white had just connected at A, white would have still gotten away with it. But this again muddies the water. It's getting more complicated as time progresses. Part of the issue here is the fact that white can always make a ko at this point. That's part of the calculation that gives white a lead at this point. White has to depend on this to a certain degree. So the game is much more complicated than it was, say, about 20 moves ago. So black's knight move at this point is sort of softening the impact of white starting that ko there to cut off the 5 black stones. It's these 5 black stones that black has to worry about. They depend on, let's just do a variation here. So if white plays here, it's going to be a ko fight. It is, for the time being, black's okay because black has room to run out into the center, but it could be a problem here. So that's why I'm playing this knight's move from the outside to strengthen my stones here, to make them a bit stronger for the case where white plays that. It's also a counterattack on this white stone here. This white stone is not going to be a kikashi for white. It's not going to be a forceful move that ends with sente maybe. So white should have just left that and should have just played in the corner.
Right.
That's a big endgame move. Like it's 7 points already when black takes that one stone, and there's a follow-up move, which is about 10 more points. It's interesting actually because when black plays here, if white plays here, then that's a 7-point difference in territories, plus 3 points for black and 4 points less for white. It gets complicated because when white plays away and black cuts here, sometimes white's going to connect, but sometimes white's going to play the ko. And in many cases, the ko is going to favor white in this game. If you look around, there's a lot of very solid white groups. White has an advantage in ko threats. For instance, white has ko threats here on the left side. White has, if it gets into a difficult ko, white would have ko threats. White could make a few ko threats here. So white has plenty of ko threats throughout the board. Throughout the game, kos are going to be advantage for white. So that's a problem that I have throughout the game because I would like to be able to use kos, for instance, like this one, to mess up the game, but I don't have enough ko threats to make it work. So I play here. The game is getting closer. You can see that white is still thinking of this here. I'm thinking of it too. It's an issue that we both have to deal with at this point. And white plays here. I connect. And now white plays here. Again, white is threatening A. It would have been simpler for white to cut at B, and white still would have had a few points to lead. And so I connect here. Again, the choice between this connection and connecting it or cutting at A is very difficult. But for instance, if I had played here, then white would have captured the 2 stones maybe. Capturing these 2 stones gives white a very relatively strong position in this whole general area. And it's going to make the cut here when white does cut with a ko here, it's going to make it much more effective. And so while this move in itself is just, it's about 9 points in itself. I'm talking about white capturing the 2 stones.
Right.
There's a lot of added value in that black is creating weak points at B and C. And is also simultaneously relieving a lot of the pressure here. In fact, for the time being, black stones are completely connected now. But the fact remains that if white had played here, now this would be putting a lot of pressure on me in the center. Now, if I just answer here, this is going to be an easy win for white. White still has enough territory. White's still winning. Black's going to win on the board a few points, probably something like 3-4 points before Komi.
All right, so
I don't really have an exact expectation here.
That's okay. I'm gonna ask this question, but folks, it's maybe a little more complicated than they want to hear. But you had said that capturing 2 stones worth 9 points, I think. So they're confused because capturing 2 stones, that's 4 points. But it's...
Right. Okay. So you just look at the 2 variations. Like in this case, if we look at the local position, so this is the limit of white's territory. That's the borderline of white's territory, and we can count. Let's count up to this point. We're going to count 4 points for black, and we're going to say white is 0. Okay. So we count the territory in the finished position. Black has 4 points, and we're going to say that we're going to ignore the white territory that is not going to change anyway, and we're going to say white has 0.
Mm-hmm.
Then if we go to the position where white captures 2 stones, now we can count the white territory as 1. Let's get rid of this triangle. 1, 2, 3, because that was the borderline before. Mm-hmm. And then there's 2 points for each black stone. So that's 3, 5, 7 points for white. Eventually, we're going to assume both sides go straight down, which is not really, it's not going to happen, but it's an average of the 2, black playing Hanatsugi or white playing there. And then white is going to get this, I'm going to put it in this way. White's going to get this forcing move. So where black had 4 points before, black now has only 2 points.
Right.
White has 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, because we're counting 2 points for each captured stone.
Mm-hmm.
That's 9 point difference. So I got it right. Yeah.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. Yeah. Well, that's pretty simple. But like this was simple because there were basically just 2 variations. Sometimes there were basically just the 2 branches to count.
But I think for folks out there to keep in mind, you don't have to worry about so much about the math or the variations or so forth. I think the main takeaway here is that what seemed like small things, and I'm going to say, and I hadn't looked at this game before, but just looking at this, even though I knew you were in a tough position, there's 2 things that I'm looking at. One is this is a fairly, it's a long game. You're younger than your opponent, and your end game is really, really strong. And so, all those into effect, making these kind of calculations. And I don't know what the time, where the time was at this point. Maybe you guys were in Endgame by this point?
I think we were both getting short. There's a point in a few moves later. I'm going to show you a point where I think I still had about 30 minutes. And I used it all to calculate the endgame.
Okay, that is exactly my point, folks, is that a lot of games can be won or lost in the end game. Games where you're way ahead that you can lose, and I have a feeling.
You can lose points with each move. So that just play a few moves and it's already 10 points. Yeah.
There you go.
I could go overboard and talk about the size of this move too. In this move, it's a bit more complicated. You want me to go into that?
Folks,
you're not sure.
Maybe. No, I do, but let me do a crowd check here, folks. Do you want to see this? Yes or no? That's a capital yes. What the heck? Okay. Let's go for it. Give them their money's worth.
Let's say in the game, black played here. If white plays at A, we're gonna even out the borders and say it's like this. Now, this is not completely honest. This exchange for 2 and 3 is actually a slight gain for black because there were issues with the borderline here that could have been a negative aspect for black. But we're just to keep things simple, relatively simple. So we're going to this is the baseline for black's territory.
Okay.
And this is the the biggest line for white. So we're going to call black's territory 0 at this point, because the points that we count are going to be starting with this point. So we're going to call black's points 0, and we're going to see what white's points difference are.
All right.
And so if black plays there, it's this move. And now we have the option of white answering, which would just be a few 3 points for black, or black playing the next local move. So like if white plays here, it's going to end like this. And so we're going to count up to this point. And we're going to say that white has 1 captured stone. So we're going to count 2 points for the captured stone, and white has 6 points. Black has captured a stone here. So black has 3 points. So white has an advantage of 3 points.
Right.
Okay, just going back to the previous variation. We know how much of the territory we're going to count now. So we can go back to the previous variation. And we counted up to this point. So white has 10 points. And black has 0. So it's in this case, white has an advantage of 10 points. Sorry, that wasn't the variation I wanted to do. In this variation, white has an advantage of 10 points. Let's see if I can find the variation. In this variation, white has an advantage of 3 points.
Okay.
So that's a gain of 7 points for black. So already, when black plays, let's see, this one. When black plays this move up to this point, black has already gained 7 points, even if white answers locally. And then the next thing we do is we have to calculate the position where white has played away and black plays the next local move. And so if white answers, this is the variation. If white plays away and black cuts here, and as I told you, there's the issue of the code, which is going to complicate things, but we're going to assume white just answers, just to keep things simple. And then we're going to even off the border here, simplify things again. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Black has 7 points. And this was the baseline for white's territory, so it's 0. So black has an advantage of 7 points. In the other variation, where white had answered, let's see, this is the variation where white had 7 points. No, white had 3 points. White had 3 points. In this variation, black has 7 points. So that's a 10-point difference. So at this point, if white plays, white's going to have a 3-point advantage. And if black plays, black's going to have a 7-point advantage. That's a difference of 10 points. So what the calculation we do is we take the median. We take the average of those 2 results because it's a half and half, but 50-50%.
Right.
White plays the next move or black plays the next move. So we have the 2 results, and we say we're going to add 5 points. We're going to add 5 points to this result for black. Because if white plays next, it's going to be this. If black plays next, it's going to be this result plus 10 points for black. So at the moment that black has played this exchange, it's going to be either the 7 points that black gains in this position. In this position, black has gained 7 points, or it's going to be 17 points. So we take the average of that, and it's going to be 12 points. So the endgame calculation has this move is worth 12 points, and the game move is only 9 points. So cutting at A was bigger as far as territory itself was concerned. But there's the weaknesses of B and C. I'm thinking that they make up for that.
Right.
In fact, if I get to cut at B, that's going to be, if white connects at A and I get to cut at B, that's probably a win for black already.
Yeah. Yeah.
So white connected with the hanging connection. The problem with this move, it's probably the losing move. But after this, it's going to be a half-point difference. Maybe I could have won by 1.5 points. Maybe I'm going to show you that. But this, it's the pressure on black with the ko is not as big as it could have been. So white should have connected here, This is actually putting a lot of pressure on black. If black answers here, this is just an easy win for white. Yeah, so that's where I was showing you. So if black takes in the corner, this is the problem. But white's going to wedge here. White's going to win this ko. White has ko-threats in the upper left. White has ko-threats here. White has ko-threats, maybe just the hana here. If white really needs the extra ko-threats, white could start with the connection here. White has all these ko-threats that are forcing. I could find some ko-threats for black, but just not enough. Like maybe this one's going to be forcing. This loses some potential, but I could play this one. I have a ko-threat here. It's not going to be enough. Like if I really get it, white has a ko-threat here too. So white has a surplus of ko-threats.
Yeah.
In the variation, I'm not going to bother with all of the details. I just go further. And I'm going to show you white playing a ko-threat. I'm going to show black. Eventually, black is going to have to do something like this. You can see white is getting a local profit here by capturing that stone. It's big. Mm-hmm. It's the points with these captures. Well, this was not strictly as capture, but there's the points there. There's the extra point here. There's the extra potential in this kind of area. And there's the fact that black's group in the center is still under attack. It means that black is not going to get, black is going to have to escape. This area is going to have a potential positive territory for white, actually. It's not going to be any territory for black. So there's a lot of extra profit that white gets. And we're going to see that in this variation, even though black escapes, eventually white is going to get this point too, because that variation I was showing you, it's just a lot of trouble for black. Black has to escape now. Eventually white is going to get to this point. So that move in the lower left corner, which was, as far as the calculation went, it was supposed to be 12 points. But it's only white's going to get all of the important points in the middle of the board. And then finally, white is going to have the tempo to play in the lower left corner. In actual fact, black only got 7 points there.
Wow.
Black did not have the initiative to take the extra profit there. And so white's getting plenty of profit back in this variation. It's a relatively easy win for white.
And that's another factor in the end game that you have to consider, that when it's not just sitting there and calculating out all the numbers. It's also even more so than normally, sente, reverse sente, all of those things become huge, right? I mean, you got to figure out if you make a mistake in terms of sente or whatever, and your numbers.
It's a case where this cut in the lower left corner, I would have no chance to play the follow-up move, and so it's sort of interesting that the calculation doesn't work as it. You have to read out the variation to actually see whether it works or not.
Interesting. Wow. So at this point of the game, what were you thinking? I mean, it looks pretty promising.
I still was playing fairly quickly. I was just playing the most complicated, the most challenging moves that were not immediately losing.
Yeah.
But the moment white played here, I had the feeling that the game was closer. The whole point is that the impact of this ko, it's not the same as it was in that variation I was showing you. Mm-hmm. White is not going to get any territory out of it. In the other ko, white was putting a black stone under Atari and was getting some immediate territorial profit here when white captures.
Sure. Yeah.
In this position in the game, back up a few moves, white is going to play the ko. If white plays the ko, the next move would be to connect here. 0 points. So white's not getting any immediate profit here. Black will have the option to play moves in the center and escape maybe. And white's profit is going to go down by 3 or 4 points.
The hanging connection, it looks a little slack somehow.
So it was a slack move. Basically, he's still under the impression that he should be able to win the game. Like he knew that he was way ahead in the middle game.
But
he played some slack moves. He knows that I've caught up a few points. His feeling, and we were both playing fairly quickly here, so his feeling is that he still has a few points extra. And he would have been right if he had played this move. But the point is that this move, he's taking the better position in this general area. This the hanging connection here is more efficient in just surrounding territory. It's less efficient when white plays the ko. So when white plays the ko, it's much better to have this way when white plays the ko. But when white is going to when you have to play a ko, you know that it's already getting to be a complicated endgame. And so when white thinks he's got an easy win, he doesn't really want to think about this variation, although he had to in this position. When he plays here, he's not so serious about playing that ko. He would rather that he could force me to connect there. So he's playing the move that takes more territory.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
It's a more peaceful move.
Yep, I get it.
But I get the peep here. And now I had a choice of playing in the lower left corner, or playing another move in the center. Both of them are very close. So I played here. I'm looking at the peep here, the peep in the center here. I'm looking at the potential to get some territory in the center. I think my analysis after the game showed that it probably would have been better to cut at A. In fact, I'll leave that I did make a variation for that, but let's just go through it. Yeah. So if I cut it, no, I didn't. Okay. So I let's go back a few moves. So we're at this point. I get the peep here. Maybe I should have cut it A actually. And white cut. I'm feeling the game is very close here, but at this point, I didn't know what to play for my next move. Basically, I have a choice of playing the Atari, which was the game move. It's a bit vulgar, but it simplifies the position. Extending is better. I don't have any good local move after white pushes here. But again, it's a point where I could play away. So I play the peep here. I force with this, and I take the corner. This is the variation where I think I might be winning by 1.5 points. I didn't like this. At this point, this is where I used my final 30 minutes to try to figure out the endgame. And my first impression here was that I've been pushed around a lot in the center of the board. And this is where I cut off my reading and I switched to the other variation because I was running out of time. And so I left this here, sort of trying to remember it so I could calculate it if I had time at the end of my calculations. But it turns out that this looks like white will play at A and black has a good move at B. So let's just put those moves in. When black plays here, white cannot cut off the black stone. White would lose 2 stones here. So black can reduce white's territory in the center. I tried to figure out this endgame. It looks like black's winning by 1.5 points. But it's a much more complicated, I found it to be a more complicated endgame. And I just didn't like the look of the board position when black is being pushed around in the center here, and white is getting some profit while doing it. And you might note that white has in the process, white has saved these stones here. Everything's connected up. So it looks like a very efficient variation for white. Of course, black has gotten this big move in the lower left corner. So it's a question of whether all of that stuff that happened in the center is important, or the 7 points that I got in the corner. Which do I take? And so I temporarily gave up on that variation. And I chose the game variation. And by the time I had figured this out, to a certain extent, I had an estimate that I was going to win. I had read to the end of the game. And it's relatively simple in this position because once we're finished with the center, once we've fixed the center position, it's relatively simple endgame moves for the rest of the board. So I tried to read out the entire board position. And I thought maybe I was winning by 0.5 point. And it turns out that I think I was right. It's a bit complicated, there's complicated points to it, but it looks like I was right.
It's so impressive. I mean, I'm not surprised. It's just that it's still.
It was actually quite an effort. It's usually not very. Usually we have, like, I did a quick estimate, and I knew it was very close. If I did a quick estimate at this point, and I was winning by something like 2.5 points, then I probably wouldn't bother to try to finish. I would save the time in case I got into a position where I had to read something like. So I would save the time.
Half a point, because
I thought it was going to be a half point.
Way?
which way. Yeah, so that's very important. So I used up all my time, and I think I figured it out fairly well. Like when I play this way, it's a much the center. It's much clearer, easier to see what's going to happen in the center. White's going to take the big point because there's no good local moves left for white. I have to remember to play that exchange. I play this forcing move. And finally, my reward is I get to clip off these white stones here. That's about 7 points too. So I thought that this was more reasonable. I thought it was a better variation. It turns out that this variation seems to be a half-point win for me, while the other variation was maybe 1.5 points. So the other variation was actually better, but this one was the one that I understood.
So that's better for you.
It's better for me, yeah. And this connection here is a key point, which sort of cements my half-point win. Like it would have been much more complicated if white had pushed through here in this variation. In which case, white has potential to force black. If white gets to cut black off in the center, maybe black's going to be forced to play at the mark point somewhere. So that's there is some complications there. After the game, I analyzed and figured out how I could deal with that and still win by half a point. But this actually, getting this point simplified it for me. And the rest of the end game, it's just this move here. I didn't. I'm playing the ko here. Again, white was threatening a ko to cut me off with a ko. I'm just simplifying the end game by making this move and this move Mia. They're interchangeable points. And then everything is just finished now.
Wow. That is a really impressive piece of work because, you know, as you were showing at a certain point, it's just a solid game for white. And white doesn't make so much any blunders. It's just kind of maybe a little overconfident. Do you think?
Overconfident. Well, he was in a position where he could have, if he was really serious about the game, like this was just the C section and it was the Judan tournament. That's not the biggest tournament there is.
Okay.
It's one of the smaller tournaments. I think if he was willing to use a lot of energy, like at his age, it would be a very taxing job to pay more attention to the end game. Maybe he could have done better, but he was just relying on his positional judgment that he had a one game.
Right.
And he was correct. Like
right.
When you're an experienced top pro, your positional judgment in that is fairly good. The problem is that you don't have an exact number of points to rely on, and you don't know. Like he played a few slack moves. It's very hard to calculate exactly how many points you're losing by playing that slack move. But his feeling that the moves were good enough was correct up to a point until he played that the hanging connection.
Right.
I'll just mark it here. This hanging connection.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which turned out to be the losing move.
Right.
And so maybe he was a bit complacent. And I lucked out. It was just a very bad game for me. The one good point about it was that I was tenacious enough to hang in there. But on the whole, I messed up in the opening, and I had a bad game throughout. And it was mostly just a question of how to keep my opponent off balance as much as possible.
Right. Well, in tennis, we often joke about, you know, it's better to be lucky than good. But I think, you know, I don't think you were lucky. I think, you know, what you did was you came up with an excellent strategy. You know, speed it up, put some pressure, and hang in there. And it wasn't like he was 20 points ahead. I mean, I know for a professional as far ahead as he was, that is a lost game. But
I think there was a point where he was winning on before Comey.
Yeah, but that's tough. That's
a lot of points.
That is an amazing game, exciting, and here's the thing for us amateurs. You know, obviously we can't read, you know, to the anywhere near this depth, but I think the takeaway is, you know, even if you got what looks like a losing position, you know, unless you want to go. I mean, if it really is a lost position, of course, you know, you can consider going ahead and resigning. But you can also, you know, try and come up with a plan, and that's what you did. So
yeah, you have to pose questions to your opponent. In this case, I didn't really have any fighting opportunities, so I tried to do it by grabbing as much territory as possible.
Yeah, Yeah, great. That's the kind of I actually like, and I know we went over time and probably into more detail than folks expected, but I think a lot of us really enjoy that, and this is the kind of stuff that is comprehensible and fun for us to try. So, although we don't have 3 hours, folks, so we got to be able to read faster and keep it
Oh, the
simple.
interesting point was that at the time I just had Leela. I didn't have Katago, which is the program that counts the board for you. And so Leela was working with 7.5 points.
Uh-huh.
And when black is won by half a point here, that's a loss for black. If you're
Right,
7.5
right.
points komi. So I was like, white's
Oh,
winning
that's
percentage was just going
funny.
up and up. At the
Oh.
end of the game, white was something like 99% or something.
And you're like, sorry, Leela, you're wrong.
Yeah, it was a few months ago.
That's
Um,
funny.
yeah.
Well, as always, wonderful. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much, Michael. And on behalf of Michael and myself, thanks to everybody for watching. As always, special thanks to our producer, Stephen Hu, who's doing a great job keeping all the bells and whistles going. And as always, thanks to the American Go Association and all its wonderful members who keep us going. Really appreciate that. That'll do it for this game. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching.